She was smiling in the group photo. Front row. Arms linked with the very people who would later be questioned in her death. 30 seconds after that shutter clicked, Vanessa Clarke walked out of frame, and would never be seen alive again. The reunion was meant to be a celebration. A 10-year flashback to high school memories, old crushes, and bad cafeteria food. They rented out a rustic lodge tucked in the hills of Colorado. Secluded. Quiet. No cell service after midnight. Perfect, they'd said, for reconnecting without distractions. 30 classmates arrived that Friday night. Some brought partners, others brought stories of babies, marriages, divorces, lost jobs, and second chances. Vanessa came alone. She didn't need anyone. Everyone loved her. Or at least, that's what people believed. She checked in at 6:23 p.m. rolled in with a single suitcase, a bottle of wine, and that diary. The one her sister would later read out loud, hand trembling, voice cracking on the words, "I feel strange being here. Like I'm being watched." By 2:10 a.m., she was gone. The lodge security cameras, 7 in total, stopped recording between 1:30 and 1:45 a.m., a system-wide malfunction that somehow resolved itself before sunrise. No one seemed to notice, or they pretended not to. Her phone was found still charging beside the bed. Her shoes, neatly placed near the rug. There was a single glass of wine on the windowsill, half-finished. Her diary tucked beneath her pillow. Nothing was broken. Nothing screamed violence. And yet, she had vanished. The next morning, someone made pancakes. Another guest played music from a Bluetooth speaker. Laughter echoed through the pine trees. No one knocked on Vanessa's door. No one checked to see if she'd made it through the night. By noon, the cleaning staff entered her room. No Vanessa. Only a made bed and the faint scent of rosewater perfume. The police were called 6 hours later. And then the questions began. Where did she go? Who was the last to see her? Why did 3 of her closest male friends leave early, without saying goodbye? One of them told police she probably left with someone. Another said she wasn't feeling well and wanted to be alone. The lodge was miles from the nearest highway. No rideshare data. No vehicle. No trace. Her body was discovered 3 days later, in a ravine less than a mile from the lodge, partially covered by leaves and moss. Her clothes were torn. Her fingernails broken. Her mouth, still open. As if she had died mid-scream. The coroner's report would confirm what many already feared. This was no accident. And the men she trusted most, the ones who held her in high school photos, called her their little sis, toasted to her that night, they would soon become the only suspects in a case that would shake the country. This is the story of Vanessa Clarke. And this is what happened the night she never came home. Stay with us. October 14, 2022. The drive to the reunion lodge took nearly 4 hours from Denver. Vanessa left the city just after noon, stopping twice along the way, once for gas, and once to pick up a bottle of red from a small roadside winery she'd read about online. The clerk remembered her. Said she was polite, quiet, and smiled when he complimented her nails. Dark burgundy with little gold stars. She said they matched her dress. She arrived at the lodge at 6:23 p.m., just as the sun began to dip behind the ridge. The air was crisp. Fall leaves blanketed the gravel path. Guests were already inside, checking in, laughing loudly over forgotten inside jokes. She waved at the front desk staff, signed the registry, and received her key, room 14, second floor, east wing. Surveillance footage from the lobby shows her entering with a small leather suitcase and a white canvas tote. Slung over one shoulder, her diary tucked visibly at the top. She smiled when she saw her friends. A wide, genuine grin. Arms thrown around old teammates and lunch table companions. One of them, Jason Carr, former football captain, now a minor real estate mogul, lifted her off the floor in a bear hug. The others followed. Of the 7 men Vanessa was closest with in high school, all were present that night. Jason Carr, Nate Howard, Tyler Mendoza, Benji Lewis, Dylan Rhodes, Marcus Finn, and Caleb Drew. They had called themselves the Crew back in senior year. The kind of tight-knit group that showed up to every party together, had matching senior hoodies, and, for a while, were untouchable in the school's social hierarchy. Vanessa was the only girl in the group. The honorary 8th. Protective big brothers, they said. Loyal to the end. But time changes people. And reunions? Reunions pull off masks. The first night was casual. A welcome dinner in the lodge's great hall. Rustic lights strung above long, wooden tables. Buffet-style catering. Music from the early 2010s playing softly in the background. People mingled, clinked glasses, and traded stories of who had moved away, who had married, who had died. Vanessa sat near the fireplace, sipping her wine slowly, her journal open in her lap. According to witnesses, she wasn't journaling every moment, just jotting little things down now and then. Quiet. Observant. Smiling, but not too much. Engaged, but withdrawn in moments. At 9:47 p.m., according to guest phone videos later posted on social media, Vanessa stood to give a toast. Her voice was warm, slightly shaky, but heartfelt. To the people who knew us before we knew ourselves, she said. To the years we'll never get back, and the things we'll never say out loud. The room applauded. Some laughed. A few wiped away tears. Jason raised his glass a second too long, eyes fixed on her, jaw set. That was the last public footage of her alive. Later, some guests went to their rooms. Others stayed near the fire pit outside, wrapped in blankets, sipping hard cider. Vanessa remained with the 7 men, her old friends. Out on the patio, the air getting colder by the minute. Around 11:20 p.m., a guest named Hannah Briggs, who'd gone back to her room for a jacket, passed by the patio and glanced through the large window. She saw Vanessa sitting on the stone bench. The men were standing in a semicircle. Nothing seemed wrong, she later told police. But something about the way Vanessa was sitting, rigid, hands clenched in her lap, stood out to her. By 11:50 p.m., Vanessa's room key was used to open her door. The lock records confirm it. No other entries were recorded after that. Her bed was untouched. The window was closed. Her journal, however, had moved, from under the pillow to the edge of the nightstand. The final journal entry was time-stamped 11:41 p.m. It read, "I thought I'd feel safe with them. I was wrong. One of them keeps watching me. Another followed me earlier when I went to the restroom. I don't know who I can trust tonight. I'm going to lock my door." Except she didn't. The door wasn't locked. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Only silence. At 2:13 a.m., the lodge's night staff member, an employee named Raul, stepped outside to smoke. He later reported hearing something unusual, a single loud shout, muffled and brief, from the direction of the woods. He assumed it was drunken shouting from the fire pit. He didn't investigate. By 7 a.m., the fire pit was cold. The wine bottles were empty. Vanessa's door was still closed. No one knocked. It wasn't until 12:36 p.m. that anyone noticed she hadn't appeared for brunch. By then, Jason and Tyler were already gone, claiming a family emergency and early flights. Marcus and Benji followed shortly after. When the police arrived, they found little. A few smudged fingerprints. Half a broken hair clip near the lodge's east trail. And the journal. Always, the journal. But it was the autopsy that shattered everything. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, signs of manual strangulation, and evidence of sexual assault by multiple individuals. The pathologist noted bruising on her wrists and inner arms, defensive wounds along her forearms, and DNA from 2 separate male contributors beneath her fingernails. The match came quickly. Jason Carr, Nate Howard. Within 48 hours, they were both in custody. Jason refused to speak. Nate asked for a lawyer the moment the results were mentioned. But then, Jason cracked. What he said chilled the room. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We were just messing around. Someone pushed it too far. When pressed to name the others, he went silent. He only said one more thing before the interview ended. She screamed. But only once. And with that, the real story began to unravel. The news spread like fire. Within hours of Jason's partial confession, reporters lined the gates of the small-town sheriff's department. Helicopters hovered above the lodge, and camera crews swarmed the trailhead where Vanessa's body had been found. Her name was everywhere. But the truth? Still tangled in silence and half-truths. The families of the accused scrambled. Statements were issued. Lawyers retained. One mother called Vanessa like a daughter to her. Another said her son would never be capable of something like this. But the evidence was heavy. The timeline, the diary, the DNA, none of it could be explained away by friendly smiles or family denial. Then came the video. Leaked by someone inside the investigation, it was shaky footage, no more than 20 seconds. Filmed on a phone. Blurred faces. Dim lighting. But what it showed was unmistakable. Vanessa. Surrounded. The laughter in the background was cruel. Her voice, pleading, muffled. A hand reached out. The camera shook, and the video cut out. The leak triggered outrage. Social media exploded. Celebrities, activists, and strangers alike posted her photo. Hashtags trended for days. Protesters stood outside the county courthouse holding signs that read, "She trusted you." And, all 7. Not just 2. The remaining 5 were suddenly nowhere to be found. Benji had boarded a flight to Belize the day after the reunion. Marcus was tracked to a family property in Oregon but left before police arrived. Caleb's apartment was abandoned, his car still parked outside, phone left behind, passport gone. Only Tyler remained in the country, hiding in plain sight, until a tip led authorities to a rented cabin in Idaho. He was arrested without resistance. Quiet. Pale. He asked only one question before being taken in. Did they all talk? With 3 in custody, investigators had enough to reconstruct most of that night. According to cell phone data, Jason, Nate, and Tyler were all near the lodge's back trail around 2 a.m., the same time Vanessa was believed to have died. Text messages from earlier that evening, retrieved from a cloud backup, included disturbing language. One from Jason to Nate read, "She still trusts us. Tonight's the night." Another, from Tyler to Marcus, said, "You in?" The prosecution called it premeditation. Defense lawyers called it bad jokes taken out of context. But for Vanessa's family, there was no confusion. Her parents sat through every hearing. Her sister wore her picture on a locket. Her brother, a former Marine, stood silently behind them in full dress uniform during the arraignment. Each hearing revealed more of the horror. Medical examiners confirmed the presence of multiple injuries, consistent with prolonged physical assault. Vanessa had fought hard. Scratches on her attackers. Blood on a tree trunk nearby. But she was overpowered. Surrounded. Outnumbered. The lodge manager came forward next. She admitted the security system had been tampered with. A technician, hired days before the reunion, had been paid in cash by an anonymous party to disable the cameras for maintenance. That technician, after being tracked down in Arizona, confessed he'd been offered $5,000 under the table. He never asked why. By the time the trial began, nearly a year had passed. Public interest hadn't faded. The courtroom was packed every day. Journalists, family members, former classmates, people who barely knew her, holding back tears as the evidence was laid bare. Jason pled guilty to second-degree murder and aggravated assault. He agreed to testify against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence, 40 years, eligible for parole after 22. Nate followed, taking a similar deal. Tyler refused to cooperate. He stood trial and was found guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Marcus and Benji remained fugitives. Caleb was captured 6 months later at a border crossing into Canada, using a fake ID. He had grown a beard, changed his hair, and lost over 30 pounds. But his voice gave him away. A border officer recognized it from the leaked video. He cried during his arraignment. Said it was a mistake. Claimed he tried to stop it. The jury didn't believe him. He was sentenced to life. With 5 now convicted, the case was considered closed. But for many, including the lead detective, it didn't feel finished. Because there were still questions. Why had Vanessa written that final journal entry as if she sensed what was coming? Why hadn't anyone intervened sooner? And what happened to the missing diary pages, 3 of them, ripped clean from the middle of the book? Her sister swore they were there the day after the body was found. She remembered flipping past them, noticing the torn edges. But when the diary was entered into evidence, the pages were gone. Someone had removed them. Someone with access. Theories spread. Some believed there was an 8th man, never identified, protected by influence or money. Others suspected a cover-up by someone close to law enforcement. A few even pointed to the lodge owner, whose ties to Jason's family dated back decades. But none of those leads went anywhere. The pages were never found. In the years since, Vanessa's family has launched a foundation in her name, focused on women's safety and campus advocacy. Her mother speaks at universities. Her father hasn't spoken publicly at all. He just sits in the front row, hands folded, eyes fixed on the stage. Vanessa Clarke is remembered as a woman of fierce loyalty, gentle strength, and quiet intuition. And though justice was served, at least in part, the silence she endured in her final moments still echoes louder than the verdicts. Because justice, no matter how loud, can never answer the one question that haunts every person who knew her. Why did the people she trusted let her die? In the weeks after the final sentencing, the lodge where Vanessa died closed its doors. Officially, the owners cited irreparable reputational damage. Unofficially, locals whispered that the land had been cursed the moment she was left to die beneath those trees. Nature grew back over the trail where her body had been found. Tourists stopped hiking that route. The staff who once worked there refused to speak on record. One, when approached, only muttered, "We all heard her scream. We just didn't know it was her." Vanessa's former classmates tried to carry on. Some deleted social media accounts. Others gave interviews, gave apologies, gave silence. A few organized vigils. Most disappeared from public view. But one classmate, Alina Frost, refused to let the memory fade. She had been Vanessa's dorm roommate during freshman year of college. They hadn't kept in close contact after graduation, but when the reunion invitation came, Vanessa had messaged her. "You're not going?" "No. You?" "Thinking about it. But I'm nervous."
"Why?" "Old friends. But I don't know if they're still good people." That message was sent 3 weeks before the reunion. Alina forwarded it to police. Then she posted it online. It went viral within hours. The world saw Vanessa's hesitation. Her quiet fear. And with it, a deeper question emerged: how many times had she felt unsafe before that night? Old classmates began coming forward. A former friend said Vanessa once confided in her after a party senior year. That Jason had pinned her against a wall while drunk and whispered something in her ear that left her shaken. She never shared what he said. She just made the friend promise not to leave her alone with him again. Another classmate, from college, recalled Vanessa becoming visibly anxious when a group of men approached their table at a bar. He'd asked her what was wrong, and she'd replied, "I don't like surprises from people I used to trust." There had been signs. Small ones. Easy to dismiss. But they weren't dismissed anymore. The public's focus turned toward prevention. How many Vanessas were out there? How many women laughed in photos with people they secretly feared? How many diaries held stories no one would ever read? A documentary crew began filming a year after the trial. They interviewed teachers, friends, investigators. The film premiered at a small festival in Austin, then was picked up by a major streaming service. It was titled, Room 14. The impact was immediate. Vanessa's story became part of national conversations around consent, coercion, and the weaponization of familiarity. Because these weren't strangers who hurt her. They were people who had once walked her home. Shared lockers with her. Told her she was safe with them. And that, more than anything, is what made the betrayal feel bottomless. The final credits of the documentary rolled over the only surviving voice we have of Vanessa, an audio clip from a school project recorded when she was 17. I don't think I want to be remembered for just one thing. I think people are more than their biggest moment. I think they're the quiet things they never say. The things they write down. That's who we really are. Those words now echo through classrooms and courtrooms. The official story ends with 5 convictions. 2 fugitives. 1 death. But the unofficial story, the one written between the lines, in missing pages and half-remembered conversations, continues to live. Because for every person who failed Vanessa that night, there are now hundreds who refuse to let her name fade into silence. And that might be the only justice left. She was meant to go home that Sunday. She'd promised her sister lunch, texted her mother she'd call, left her cat enough food for 2 nights. Instead, she became a headline. A case file. A name in a courtroom. A face on a flyer. But Vanessa Clarke was never just a victim. She was a friend. A sister. A daughter. A woman who saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. And in the end, it wasn't her silence that defined her. It was her courage to write down the truth when it would have been easier to smile and stay quiet. That journal became her voice. The pages, her testimony. She knew something was wrong. She felt it. She documented it. And because of that, we know. We know who took her life. We know how long she fought. We know how far she trusted. And we know who betrayed that trust. She didn't get to tell her story. So we tell it for her. This was the story of Vanessa Clarke. And this time, you heard her. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share Vanessa's story. Let her voice reach others who may be in silence right now. Comment below. Do you believe justice was truly served? Why do you think the missing diary pages were taken, and who do you think took them? Subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines. Like the video if you believe her story needed to be heard. And never forget. Sometimes, the most powerful evidence is the voice they tried to erase. Tell us, what's your theory?